In 2019, a group of concerned citizens formed, calling themselves the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, TRC. Among its members were Hollywood celebrities like Oliver Stone, Alec Baldwin, and Martin Sheen, alongside figures like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Isaac Newton Ferris Jr., the nephew of Martin Luther King Jr. The TRC pushed the idea that the assassinations of President Kennedy, his brother Robert, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X were all part of conspiracies orchestrated by the government and subsequently covered up. They argued that James Earl Ray, who had been convicted of killing King, wasn't the true assassin. The TRC believed that the narrative of the deep state conspiracy recast the evidence in a way that aligned with the idea that King was so threatening to the power structure that he had to be eliminated. Even after government files were released and 5 separate investigations concluded that Ray was guilty, many Americans still clung to the belief that a conspiracy had occurred. When King was murdered in 1968, it wasn't entirely unreasonable to question whether there had been a conspiracy. Investigators, both private and government, were digging into Ray's crime, trying to understand his motives. The FBI itself seemed to hint at a conspiracy during its investigation of Ray's flight from justice. President Lyndon Johnson had requested the FBI's involvement, and Ray's inclusion on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list invoked the term conspiracy. To the FBI, it was important to prove that a federal crime had been committed, leading to charges of conspiracy to deprive King of his civil rights. This, in turn, fueled suspicions that the government, including the Johnson administration and the FBI, might have been behind the plot to kill King. As time passed, skepticism of the official findings turned into a poisonous fiction promoted by extreme conspiracy theorists who had no basis in reality. These theorists insisted that hundreds, if not thousands, of government employees had conspired together to murder King. They ignored the fact that such a large conspiracy would be nearly impossible to keep secret, given the nature of bureaucracies. As FBI profiler John Douglas put it, nothing that big or well-publicized stays secret for long. If FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had planned King's assassination, why wouldn't he have destroyed the COINTELPRO records, files detailing the FBI's efforts to discredit King, as well as other left-wing groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the American Communist Party? Yet, no such destruction occurred. Ray had pleaded guilty in 1969 and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Over time, he recognized that the support he was receiving, especially from African American leaders who believed the government was behind the assassination, could be weaponized for his benefit. The key unifying factor for all of these supporters was their mistrust of the FBI. Ray, aware that public opinion was rife with conspiracy theories, also took advantage of the prevailing climate, especially after the assassination of President Kennedy. In a time when many believed Oswald had been part of a larger conspiracy, it was easy for Ray to claim that the government had been involved in King's murder. Ray's defenders, seeking to downplay his guilt, found a convenient theory: a government conspiracy to eliminate King because he was seen as a threat. Despite all evidence pointing to Ray's guilt, conspiracy theorists distorted the facts to support their claim. They painted Ray as an incompetent criminal who could never have committed the murder on his own, instead suggesting powerful forces must have been behind it. In the years that followed his trial, Ray clung to this idea of a vast conspiracy. For him, promoting this narrative was a way to maintain his hope for freedom, or at the very least, gain notoriety in prison. The notion of a conspiracy also helped sell his story, providing financial means to continue fighting his case. In the late 1970s, the U.S. House Select Committee on Assassinations explored the possibility that a group of business people from St. Louis had put a bounty on King's head. However, the committee found no evidence linking the FBI or other government agencies to the assassination. Despite this, the idea of a bounty on King's life remained plausible, with some far-right extremists advocating for it. There was also evidence that Ray's brothers, John and Jerry, knew of the bounty, but no proof they ever collected it. Extensive investigations failed to find any large sums of money in their possession. If they had attempted to claim the bounty, they would have put their lives in jeopardy. This, however, didn't stop Ray's story from gaining traction among his defenders. In 1999, Ray's lawyer, William Pepper, and others pushed the narrative of a government conspiracy to a civil trial, with Lloyd Jowers as the key defendant. Jowers was found guilty, but the trial was one-sided, with important evidence and witnesses left out. Pulitzer Prize-winning author David Garrow called the verdict meaningless, noting how Jowers had been eager to take the fall for the assassination and had previously made inconsistent statements. Justice Department's investigation in 2000, following Jowers' trial, found no evidence of a government conspiracy. In fact, the investigators concluded that the conspiracy theories were entirely baseless. Ray's life as a fugitive was a series of risky moves. Having escaped from prison in 1967, he had little chance of establishing a permanent life. His options were limited: continue smuggling drugs, robbing banks, or committing some other crime that would eventually lead to his capture. Killing King, however, would give him the notoriety he craved, and perhaps even a chance at freedom if the right circumstances played out. His crime would make him infamous. Ray had been in and out of trouble all his life, and by the time he committed the murder, he was approaching 40 with little hope of a future outside of prison. Killing King gave him a shot at immortality. If he escaped abroad, he could return after time had passed and potentially find a sympathetic jury. Alternatively, his capture would elevate his status in prison. When Ray pled guilty in 1969, his lawyer, Percy Foreman, convinced him it was in his best interest. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison, and he would spend the next several decades behind bars. He died in 1998 from liver disease caused by hepatitis C, contracted from a prison attack years earlier. While the idea of a deep state conspiracy to kill King was utterly false, there was indeed a conspiracy in the true sense of the word. Ray, with the help of his brothers, planned and executed the murder. His motivations were rooted in his hatred for King and the hope that the notoriety from the assassination would benefit him financially. Despite evidence of the Ray brothers' involvement in the murder, there was never enough to charge them. As much as investigators tried to piece together the details of the plot, the brothers' role remained murky. It is clear, though, that James Earl Ray never acted alone. He was aided by his brothers, who, despite their involvement, stuck to their silence, adhering to the family code of never turning on one another. Ray, throughout his life, never admitted guilt. Even after his death, the legacy of his silence continued to fuel conspiracy theories. It wasn't just the fear of implicating his brothers that kept him from confessing. It was the recognition that admitting guilt would end the lucrative conspiracy industry that had supported him for years. In the end, Ray's life was one of deceit, manipulation, and a refusal to cooperate with the justice system. Thank you for watching. To hear more interesting stories, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive updates on the latest videos.